Once the greatest gold production center in the human lands, it was said that the Deadmines gold deposits once accounted for over a third of Stormwind's treasure reserves. However, they were abandoned during the First War when the Horde seized Stormwind. Since then, the Deadmines have been occupied by one group of ne'er-do-wells or another, such as Captain Bramblebeard and his pirate cronies. The most prolific and well-known of these groups is the Defias Brotherhood, a group of assassins, bandits, brigands, thieves, pirates, and former stonemasons, formerly led by Edwin Van Cleef, now led by Vanessa Van Cleef, his daughter. Having spoken a little bit about the lore of the Deadmines, let's now take a look at it from a game perspective. If you started playing World of Warcraft in the Cataclysm expansion on the Alliance side, particularly if you played a human who leveled through the Westfall questline, then the Deadmines was very likely the first dungeon you participated in, at roughly level 20. In fact, if you looked at third-party resources or leveling guides of the time, it would suggest the Deadmines to be the first dungeon Alliance players should play, as it was designed from the ground up to be the Alliance players' introduction to the dungeon experience as a whole. The Deadmines, for a group of players completely new to MMORPGs, should take roughly 30 minutes to complete, give or take 10 minutes depending on how quickly the players pick up on new mechanics. While there are certainly some things in this dungeon that will surprise new players, and make them use their new interrupts or cooldowns, there is nothing in this dungeon that will be an insurmountable wall. Now, with that being said, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what, and more importantly, who is in this dungeon. The rank and file, or trash mobs, of this dungeon are made up of laborers, wizards, pirates, goblins, and such, a unique mix of races and classes that feel like they belong together thanks to the lore behind the dungeon. Said lore is further exemplified by the bosses of the dungeon: Glubtalk, Helix Gearbreaker, Foe Reaper 5000, Admiral Ripsnarl, and Captain Cookie. If you played through the Westfall questline, or watched my previous video about the lore of Westfall, more than half of those names should sound familiar to you. This of course makes this dungeon more exciting for you, as you are now tying up loose ends left after playing through the Westfall zone. However, you have probably noticed there is a name that is not there that should be: Vanessa Van Cleef. This is because in the Cataclysm expansion, the Old World, or the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor continents, were completely revamped with new quests, new NPCs, enemies, and in some cases, completely redeveloped zones. In this revamp, the dungeons were looked at as well, and while the majority of dungeons had minor changes that had them line up with current lore more than they previously did, two dungeons, however, the Deadmines and Shadowfang Keep, had complete overhauls and were given heroic versions, including additional bosses like Vanessa Van Cleef. Having faffed on a bit, I think it's time we start looking at the bosses, starting with Glubtalk. Glubtalk is a two-headed ogre magi that does not seem to have the best control of his magic, often using it in fits of rage that have unintended side effects, for example, destroying his own ogre mound. Shortly before his admission into the Defias Brotherhood, Glubtalk ran an extortion operation out of the Jangalode mines. However, he was approached by Vanessa Van Cleef and given a simple choice: fight me and die, or work for me. Glubtalk, proving he had intelligence, quickly joined up with Vanessa. Glubtalk's appearance is that of a powerfully built two-headed ogre, with one of his heads having a distinct mohawk, while the other wears the cowl of a sorcerer or wizard. Along with this, he is lightly armored in a wizard's robe, worn more like a toga that shows off the magical, or possibly clan, symbol tattooed on his broad chest. Overall, this gives Glubtalk the appearance of someone who, while having knowledge of the arcane arts, is ultimately a thug and a bully, who would rather use his muscles, magical or mundane, than his brain to accomplish his goals. This is shown further in how Glubtalk uses his magical abilities, channeling the elements of fire and frost into his fists to pummel his foes. There are no particular skills needed to defeat Glubtalk in either the normal or heroic versions. Simply keep the party healed, keep the damage coming, and don't stand in the fire. The second boss of the Deadmines is Helix Gearbreaker. Gearbreaker was once one of the many faceless and nameless members of the Bilgewater cartel. However, when the Defias offered him an amount of gold he would never be able to make in his current lifestyle, he quickly left the cartel and started working for the Defias, his main job to make the mast of the Defias juggernaut. This says all that really needs to be said about Helix Gearbreaker. He is a rather standard goblin that can be led around by his coin pouch. He is not particularly loyal to the Defias, but as long as they are paying him, he will fight to protect them, or his paycheck anyway. There is one unique thing about Gearbreaker. He is considered a rogue, however, he prepares to fight in the light, fearing the shadow, and spiders particularly. In appearance, Gearbreaker is that of a craftsman, not a fighter, and he is well aware of this fact, preferring to use his intellect and others to fight. One of Gearbreaker's most obvious compensations for his lack of strength are his lumbering oaf servants, large mountains of muscle in the form of hobgoblins that follow his every command. Helix's intelligence is also greatly shown off in the boss fight mechanics. The lumbering oaf he rides will occasionally pick up a party member and slam it against an arena wall, allowing him to damage the player out of range of the healer. Helix himself will occasionally jump on players, planting a bomb on them, forcing said player to remove themselves from the party, lest they deal massive damage to everyone. Along with this, lumbering oafs stationed above the arena will throw bombs down that will explode after a few seconds, forcing players to fight in poor positions or take damage that they could otherwise avoid. All of this is used to paint Helix Gearbreaker as an intelligent and dangerous foe that should not be underestimated. There is not much to say about Foe Reaper 5000. It is simply a monstrously large mechanical harvester that the Defias have created to slaughter and terrify anyone that is designated as a foe. It looks exactly the same as a standard mechanical harvester, with the one exception being that it is roughly 3 times the size of the standard mechanical harvester. Unsurprisingly, this has led to a boss fight that does not have particular difficult mechanics. Simply stay away from the front of the boss and anyone it charges at. And keep your heals strong and this boss will go down in no time at all. Next we come to Vanessa's final recruit from the Westfall questline, James Harrington, now the Savage Worgen, Admiral Ripsnarl. Ripsnarl is one of the many people of Azeroth that has since been affected by the Worgen curse since the fall of Gilneas. He was once a well thought of admiral of the Alliance Navy, however when the curse took him, he savagely murdered his 2 children and wife. When his mind had finally come back to him, he fled to Westfall to live out the rest of his life in shame and guilt. Unfortunately, he was unable to keep his savage tendencies under control, and was caught by the Alliance forces upon Sentinel Hill, where he was slowly recruited to the side of, and freed by, the Defias Brotherhood, taking up the mantle of Admiral of the Defias Juggernaut. In his human form, Ripsnarl is a shirtless human male with a large unkempt beard. He wears poorly taken care of pants, shoes, and a well taken care of Admiral's hat. In his Worgen form, he has the appearance of a raging werewolf. He has lost his Admiral hat and gained the tattered remains of a shirt. In combat, Ripsnarl fights in his Worgen form and uses a combination of savage, bloodthirsty attacks and cunning hit-and-run tactics. All of this paints the picture of someone who has only managed to keep enough of his humanity to not be a threat to his new allies. As the boss fight progresses, Ripsnarl gets more and more dangerous, attacking faster and faster. For this reason, damage dealers should be attacking him from behind. Along with this, every time Ripsnarl loses 25% of his HP, he will summon a fog to hide within. At the same time, he will summon trash that should be dealt with as soon as possible. Once the fog has faded away, Ripsnarl will jump out and stun a random target for 2 seconds. Keep your party healed, and this fight will be over with little difficulty. Upon Ripsnarl's defeat, Captain Cookie will make his way out of the hut atop the Juggernaut. Cookie has the appearance of a larger-than-average Murloc that wears a captain's hat. Upon the death of the previous commander of the Defias Juggernaut, Cookie proclaimed himself as the new captain. However, he still performed his regular duties as head chef. As the fight begins, Cookie throws out a massive cauldron, sitting in it while it boils the food he throws out to attack the party. As the fight progresses, Cookie will throw food on the floor around the players. This food will poison nearby players, slowing them down. However, this poison can be removed by eating the unpoisoned food he also throws. Unsurprisingly, staying too close to the cauldron will burn players. Overall, this battle is a simple race between your healer being able to keep your party alive and your party being able to deal enough damage to take down Cookie. Now we come to the final boss of the dungeon, and one of the most complex bosses you can find outside of a raid. Vanessa Van Cleef, daughter of Edwin Van Cleef and newest leader of the Defias Brotherhood. She has a great hatred of Stormwind for what they did to her father and is willing to do or align herself with anything or anyone to make them suffer like they have made her suffer. Vanessa takes the appearance of a young woman wearing light leathers that show off her body. Vanessa will start the fight off by letting the party know her specialty was never with the dagger, but instead with hallucinogenic poisons, as she throws a vial at the party. In this hallucination, the party must make their way back to the top of the Defias Juggernaut, while dealing with the deep-seated fears of the previous bosses of the Deadmines. Once you have made your way back to her, the real fight begins. Vanessa will attack you with gusto while summoning in trash mobs from within the interior of the Juggernaut to help her fight. Every now and then, Vanessa will begin to parry your attacks. When she does, stop focusing on her and use this time to deal with the trash. When Vanessa has been reduced to 50% and 25% of her maximum HP, she will flee from the Juggernaut and set off some explosions before returning to finish the party off. To avoid this, follow Vanessa's lead and use the ropes to get off the ship while the explosions are going off. This all shows that Vanessa is more than just words, and she really will do or sacrifice anything to succeed in getting vengeance for what happened to her father. Overall, the Deadmines are great at what they are trying to be, an introduction to how dungeons work, and a way to clean up the loose ends left behind by the questline of Westfall. Before we finish up, I will give my personal rating on this dungeon. I will be judging the dungeon based on the following metrics. Length, how long does it take to complete the dungeon? Difficulty, how difficult is it to complete the dungeon? Boss complexity, how complex are the boss mechanics? Enjoyment, how much enjoyment did I get out of the dungeon? Appearance/themes, how well does it actually match the dungeon theme? All of these will be rated between 1 and 5, and then the average will determine the dungeon's overall result. Length, I give this dungeon a 5 out of 5 on length. I don't feel like it overstays its welcome at all. This dungeon takes about 20 minutes, which I feel is the perfect amount of time to spend in a dungeon. Difficulty. The Deadmines is not a particularly difficult dungeon on normal or heroic, nor is it a particularly easy dungeon. It sits pretty squarely in the middle, and for that I give it a 3 out of 5. In the normal version of this dungeon, the bosses have very little in terms of complex mechanics, focusing more on teaching the fundamentals of how to run a dungeon. The heroic version, however, adds more complex mechanics that force players to pay attention to what is going on. I will give this a 3 out of 5. Enjoyment. As a first-time dungeon, this dungeon is very enjoyable, but I would not be willing to give it a solid 5, as you will find dungeons you enjoy a lot more as you play further through the game, so I have to give it a 4 out of 5. Appearance. The Deadmines is supposed to be a gold mine that has been taken over by a group of ruffians and smugglers, and I would say the dungeon does an incredible job of showing this off. The first part of the dungeon is a gold mine with multiple NPCs chipping away at the walls. However, as you get deeper into the dungeon, this changes, and you see a lumber house, a forge, and a gigantic ship being built. And because none of this feels like it doesn't belong, you never question why any of it is there. For these reasons, I will give Appearance a rating of 5 out of 5. This leaves the Deadmines with an overall rating of 4 out of 5, making it a very solid dungeon. I hope you enjoyed this. It kinda got away with me. I thought it was going to be a lot shorter than it ended up being, but when I started writing the script, I just kept going and going. Anyway, this will be the format I take with any dungeon videos I do in the future. I hope to refine them a bit as time goes on, as I feel I did faff on a bit, but all I can do is get better. Next week was originally going to be another upload of Oldanimans making his way through Duskwood. However, that might change. I am currently working on something new, and depending on how excited I get whilst doing it, it may be my next week's upload. It will still be very similar content, but it might not be Oldanimans. As always, if you have enjoyed this, please leave a like, subscribe, and feel free to ask any questions in the comments. I'll be more than happy to answer them. And see you next time.